Hi, I'm Brian Moran, founder of Government CIO. Welcome to Government CIO Magazine.
Hello and welcome to Government CIO Magazine. Today we're sitting down with Chief Information Officer for the Department of Defense, Ms. Teri Takai.
The real challenge has been at DoD not that we don't have technology, but we have a lot of technology. And the challenge for us is, it isn't just about the fact that technology is a significant expenditure for the department, but it's really becoming more a question of being able to defend our networks and our infrastructure from a cybersecurity perspective. And so the Joint Information Enterprise effort that's going on today is to say we really have to reduce the amount of diversity that we have. We have to get more standardized, we have to get more common, and in some cases becoming more standardized and common is going to mean that we are going to consolidate and actually have fewer instances and fewer configurations of technology. So again, we can operate from the cybersecurity perspective and be able to protect our networks. The other piece of that that's extremely important is that for DoD, information sharing is really critical. And the diversity of technologies that we have today make it very difficult for us to do that information sharing. We do it, but we do it by expending additional dollars and additional resources. So that's really the approach behind the Joint Information Enterprise and why we're going after it. Well, establishing a joint information architecture is not it's not for the faint of heart, first of all. And the challenge for other CIOs, the challenge that I've had here, isn't so much the technology piece. The technology piece, we pretty much know how to do this. It's very much more a question of, do you have senior level buy-in? The senior management believe that there's value in having people migrate. And then it's very much around being able to come up with the right governance structure so that those individuals that are responsible for delivering that technology are comfortable that they can fulfill their role and do their job when they may not control all of that architecture, where they may actually be using a service provider, either internal or external, to get their job done. And then they have to be comfortable that in that setting, they're going to be able to perform the duties. So I think the challenge here is to start out with who are the stakeholders, who is the senior leaders, and then be very clear about what is the objective. Is it cost savings? Is it security? Is it information sharing? So that there's that shared understanding of what we're doing it for before you ever get into the mechanics of how do you actually structure it and what's it actually going to look like. Well, let's talk first about the approach that we're using and then go to some of the lessons learned. I think as you may have read or heard, we have, at least by last count, 772 data centers. Actually, we have a few more than that when we've done some additional inventory work. And our objective is to get down over the course of the next 5 years to around 100 data centers. And that's just a huge challenge for us. Our approach from a strategy perspective has been, we don't believe that these are all going to be joint data centers necessarily. We're saying that each of the services is going to do and is doing a data center consolidation. And now we're looking at how do we look across DoD and say how can those data centers be better leveraged outside of perhaps even an individual service. So we're still working out the details of that. The other thing is that, of course, we have the Defense Information Systems Agency, who is a provider today of data center capabilities. So they are starting and will be the source of many of our enterprise services. So for instance, we have an enterprise email initiative where Army is the first customer for that. Air Force is going to be coming in behind. So our strategy is around the services doing theirs, around us having DISA, and then going to an enterprise set of services. The challenges and the lessons learned have been really interesting. I'll give you one of the lessons learned that's been really, I think, a fascinating sort of example. Army had a data center that they actually were able to shut down as part of their overall structure. But then when it came to what were the savings associated with that, they're very difficult to tally because they're in facilities, they're in any number of, quote, buckets of dollars. And so actually being able to come up with the savings related to that has been a bit of a challenge. Well, I think for us it's really twofold. It's data standardization and trying to get to a common lexicon of the way we speak. But the other problem for us has been we want to actually tag our information so that we then can link that to our identity management system and actually do what we call attribute-based access control. The challenge of data tagging is really the expense of doing it versus the savings that you get, if you will, or the protection that you get from doing it. That's really been our major challenge, and we've not really completely overcome that challenge. NSA has really done, I think, a better job as it's related to the way that they're addressing their big data issues and being able to do data tagging and being able to link that to identity. We are doing it in selected areas, particularly around our command and control, but we've been still working on how do we expand that to really get to the broader DoD base of information. On data standardization, which is a little different from the tagging and the identification, we're really tying that into work that our DCMO organization is doing, particularly on business systems, where they've established a business framework. And by starting with a business framework, they're actually looking at how to look at common processes across the organization and then be able to drive to, looking at how we effectively not only standardize the data, but also look at techniques to be able to utilize data, even though it may not be uniform across the organization. We're just so big that we can't sort of assume that we're going to be able to standardize everything. We also have to look at techniques where we can use the data the way it is, and then still be able to bring it together for what our needs are. Well, I think we're making significant progress in data security. I tell you, we all have a long way to go. I think that we've focused on it, which I think is good. Unfortunately, to some extent, that was really exacerbated and made clear to us with the incidents around WikiLeaks. So we have published very, very strong policies, because again, from an insider threat standpoint, it starts with the people. You can put a lot of technology in, but in the end, it really does start there. So everyone throughout the organization, including very extensively in the military organizations, have put out mandates around thumb drives, around transfer of data, around, first of all, having people feel responsible for their data just as they would be responsible for their weapons, really. But in addition to that, we've deployed several tools, including our host-based security system. So there was a mandate to drive that out throughout the organization. We have completed our PKI implementation on our unclassified. We're making great progress on our PKI rollout for our classified networks. We're looking at additional tools that build on top of the host-based security system that look for anomalous behavior. We're starting into really looking at how to put resiliency into our networks from a continuous monitoring standpoint. So I could go on and on, but those are just the examples of the things that we're very focused on. We consider certainly cyber defense to be a dramatic part of what we're doing from a cybersecurity perspective, and that cyber defense really involves not just what you'd think of as information assurance, but what we call active cyber defense as well. Well, I think that one of the biggest threats that we have is the exploitation of our information. So I think we've moved from disruption of our networks and disruption of our operations into a much more insidious threat, if you will, which is exploitation of information. And that's exploitation of information not only from ourselves, but from our partners in the defense industrial base. And that requires us to think about a different set of capabilities, a different set of tools. The second is that the amount of traffic and the just sheer size of the threat, if you will, means that we also always have to be prepared that we may have a breach. And so now we're moving from beyond just thinking about protecting at the perimeter, which is important. You need that from a deterrence perspective. But how, in fact, do we detect when we have been breached, what that breach really constitutes, and then decide, what actions we take inside the network to be able to actually handle that. And lastly, we're moving beyond our ability to manage all of this with people doing analysis. We really have to get to tools that do analysis for us in order to be able to flag the anomalies. So those are three areas, I think, and clearly not all of the areas, but I think that the nature of the threat is changing, and I think that, we're working to respond to that, but it takes us to a whole new level in terms of what we have to do. Well, let me just start with the security part of cloud computing and then go on to the general management challenges, because I do think that those are two really, really good and important points. For us, it is important that we can get the same level of security. And so there's two sides of that. One is that by moving to a cloud architecture, and that coupled with our data center consolidation, because those two things in our mind go together, we can create private clouds that then get us to a uniform level of security for all of our data centers and all of our hosting, if you will. So cloud computing has a huge advantage for us because it puts uniformity into the way that we do security and the way that we protect our data. And to do that, we always have to be sure that it isn't necessarily one size fits all, but that the overall architecture assures that we are going to be able to protect our data. You then look at that and say, how do I look at how I can use commercial cloud providers, because it doesn't necessarily mean that everything will be in private clouds. And that's why we're working with the FedRAMP program that the Federal CIO Council has been working with. We're one of the three chairs of that, because we believe that the validation, if you will, of commercial cloud providers to the NIST security standards is the great place to start. We then will bring that in and look at what additional security requirements do we at DoD need, and then we will be certifying cloud providers, commercial cloud providers for DoD to use. And all of that then goes to your question about general management. General management means it isn't just a question of making sure the security is in place, but we have to make sure that in our contracts for cloud computing that we can do information sharing, that we have the right terms and conditions about data ownership. And to do that, what we've just felt is very important is to have a single entity that looks at both how we're running our private clouds as well as our commercial clouds. And so we're moving to a cloud broker concept, which I think you've seen, discussed in many of the articles and in the press, so that we're sure that we are able to benefit from both private and commercial clouds, but we're doing it in a way that we have control over it, and we get, quote, sort of standard conditions and terms, so that we can make sure we're secure, but also that, from a commercial standpoint, with commercial cloud providers, we're protecting our information as well as making sure we have the right information sharing abilities with that. The one area that I think is important that we are focused on, and that is what we call our mobility strategy. I think all of us and all the CIOs are challenged with what do we do with the smartphones, what do we do with what we call commercial mobile devices. We have a little bit bigger challenge, I think, in some ways, because the DoD, the demand isn't sort of just, can I do my email on my smartphone? Can I see, some of the applications? But we're actually getting a demand signal that says the warfighter would like to be able to use commercial mobile devices, not just smartphones, but tablets, in order to be able to enhance what they do. So, we see that some of that demand is really a big push on us. And one of the things that we have to scramble with is being able to use those devices at an unclassified level as well as at a classified level. And the other challenge that we have is that with the diversity of the networks that we have, it's very difficult for us to come up with a single set of standards that say you can use any commercial device. And that's been really one of the things that we've been very concerned about, because if we don't get a strategy and if we don't get some ground rules in place, before we know it, we are going to have a proliferation of those devices, and it'll be in an uncontrolled way. So we've been focused on that a great deal. We're actually going to be coming out with some guidelines that actually speed up the introduction of devices into our networks in a very safe way, because that's the other problem that DoD is always accused of, is that it takes us many, many more months than it should for us to get new technology in. So we're trying to address that, which we think is important. We're addressing the security implications of that. And then we're also addressing the question of how do you do it, how do you introduce commercial mobile devices into a classified environment, which is really what our warfighters need. I know that we're all faced with those challenges, but I think it is important for all the CIOs to recognize the security challenges and making sure that they're addressing those, because they're going to be huge in the future. We are very much focused on the point that you raise around having more agility in our acquisition process. As I love to say, there isn't an acquisition that takes place here at DoD that doesn't have a technology component to it, right? And there isn't technology that doesn't have acquisition involved in it. So one of the things that we've done, and we're working with the Acquisition Technology and Logistics Organization on this, is that we have actually put together a workbook, if you will, that's going to be an appendix to our DoD 5000 acquisition approach that actually lays out frameworks for doing agile IT development, because we felt like we needed that next level of detail so that those folks that are going out, both acquisition professionals and IT professionals, had more detail in terms of how to go about agile development, and working towards a spiral development, incremental deliverable methodology that I think has been something that's been in the private sector for quite a while, but has been very difficult for us to embrace. We're very used to a very methodical, sort of more of a waterfall approach. So that's one of the things that my office has been working on with AT&L. We're intending to introduce that both in terms of the workbook, but we're also intending to introduce that with our acquisition partners as a part of their training process. So that's some of the work that we're doing. On the technology front, I think it is important that one of the reasons that we're going to and moving to a joint information environment is actually to get to more agile delivery. When we are creating technology solutions from the ground up, as I say, from the data center up, we spend so much time building infrastructure that we're not agile in terms of being able to put applications out. And I think sometimes that kind of gets lost in why are you doing commonization and standardization. It isn't just to save money, it isn't just for security, but if you do it right, you can get to the point where you can build applications on it using an agile development methodology, get them out much more quickly. So for instance, another example of that is a part of our mobility strategy is to use, sort of the concept of an application store, but one that would be DoD, where each of the services, as they're developing the applications on a common platform, would be able to then put it into an application store format, that we would vet the applications to ensure that they met our security requirements, but it could be used really by anyone within DoD that needed it. So I think those things are important because it sort of demonstrates how these are not discrete activities that we're doing as it relates to our IT modernization, but they come together. And the bottom line of that is to get application capability out to the warfighter more quickly than what we can do it today.